Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Thank you once again for joining me here for another week. This week, I'm very excited to chat to Kathy Imabayashi, all the way over in Japan. Kathy has a company called Sunhood Coaching, where she specializes in helping parents with their young boys, which is something that I'm very excited about, being a father of a young boy myself. So I'm excited to chat to Kathy today. So thank you so much for joining me, Kathy. I appreciate your time. Do you want to just open up and give everybody the Kathy story? What's led you to this point, and away you go.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt, for having me to begin with. I'm Canadian by birth. I came to Japan for the first time in '85, and I was here for 19 years. And I came over because I read a book and I had a feeling, and I kind of trust my instincts about a lot of things, which is also connected with what I'm doing today, business wise. My career has been in education, mostly early years and elementary. Uh, when so we had our son. I wasn't getting married. I wasn't having children. That was not in my plan for my future. I was quite happy to um, work with children, young children. Thought maybe I'd adopt someday. It was nothing that I had planned in my life turned out to be really what the plan was. We had our son when they labeled me as the mature mother, and he's the only child that came to full term. And when he was born, I really thought I understood quite a lot, like more than the average person, about young children, because that was my whole world at that time, and career wise. So I thought I had a handle on things, and I had lived enough in my life that I'd kind of, you know, sowed my oats, kind of. And I was really ready to parent and excited about that part of this next part of my life. So the first 3 years, a little bit more than 3 years, was the normal new parent adjusting to a different life and highs and lows. And but I could get my hands on enough information to understand that I was kind of in the norm. I was doing fine. Things were okay. And then when he was about 3.5 or so, on a Saturday. So I will explain this situation because this is how everything started for me. Um, and the important part of it is I really thought um, this would not be my story. When he was 3.5, between 3 and 4, on a Saturday morning, a beautiful Saturday morning, his dad was working and he wanted to go fishing. So we packed up his little plastic fishing rod and I took some magazines and we went to this little place just a little bit off the road, a little bit down into the woods, a creek, beautiful. Never ever thought of safety. Living in Japan, I had no concerns about safety. And we were having a lovely time together, the two of us, when all of a sudden, out of the side of my eye, I could see movement, and I looked, and there was what I classified in my head as a gang of young boys coming down that path. And there was something that happened that was so strong and so deep and so guttural, and it was total and absolute fear. It was like, there's a gang of boys coming down here. How am I going to protect my little boy and myself? And it was an automatic, no thinking, guttural response. These boys came down, and it was really obvious really quickly that they were that age group in between, just before going into middle school. So, 11, 12, 13 was the group. So they were boys whose bodies, especially in that summer, just grow. So they got these bigger bodies, but inside they've got these little boy hearts. And there was no reason for me to be fearful, none at all. And in fact, at that particular time, I was working in upper elementary. So I was working with that age group. So I should have known better than anyone else, and I didn't. So the rest of the day was a lovely time. We had a really good time with these boys. My little guy loved being around the big boys, and that could have been it. But I have a tendency to overthink and overanalyze everything. And so that night it was like I was trying to figure out where did that come from? Like why did I have that reaction? Because that doesn't seem like me. Like I don't have those biases. I don't stereotype like that. And I could not come up with any logical reason. I hadn't had any trauma in my own life that would have instigated that kind of a trigger. There was no logical reason. And then I had a thought that was the thought that just, you know, took me over the edge. But it was like, okay, my little guy in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, is there going to be another mom who is filled with absolute fear simply because he's a male? And there was something about that image of someone being so afraid of my little boy for no other reason than he was male that was like, something's wrong with this picture. And I don't know what it is, and I don't understand it, but I'm going to find out. So it's been like 27 years now, and I'm still finding out. But that's how it all started. And um, from that point on, I just really, anything I could get my hands on, and there wasn't as much then as there is now. I learned everything I could and then tried to share it. So I was in education. So I did parent workshops and peer teaching workshops. I, it was like the thing that made me just, it drove me. It was something kind of uncontrollable, but also fascinating, like absolutely fascinating. So when, I guess it's 4 years this summer, I retired from education, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to do something because education doesn't really give you especially international education doesn't provide for your senior years. And I was going to go the easy route. I'm in a country where you can pick up pretty good money teaching English. And it was kind of like, okay, this is the third chapter for me in my life. And I've spent my whole life supporting children, supporting parents, supporting educators. So it kind of felt like a no-brainer that I had to keep going on. So I started a business, and a whole lot more work than I thought it was going to be. And very lucky to have, a son who helped me, especially with the technology things, helped with the website, helped, technology. So in those 4 years, I started the business, developed a website, revamped the website twice, made a dozen or so online courses for parents to access, and just recently published a book, my first parenting book, and spend time trying to connect with parents that are looking for support.
That's great. That's a pretty powerful story and a pretty powerful experience you had with those young men at that point,
Yeah.
and to have that as a tipping point for you to relate back to, you know, the potential experiences people might have with your son, because it's such a pertinent thing at the moment, isn't it? Where, men are almost, and especially boys, where they're almost ostracized to a point,
Mm-hmm.
where we're almost encouraged that there should be this natural fear mechanism around them, which
Yeah.
is really disappointing. It's something that for me, you don't want people to feel that way. You don't want people to feel uncomfortable. You want people to they should feel comfortable around men. Like, men should be protectors.
Well, there's so much of it, and the biggest part of it is that you don't know what you don't know.
Hmm.
So you never think, if I had just taken that experience at face value, then it just would have been an experience. But because you always think, oh, my son would never do that, or my son would never, like, you don't think of it, upfront and personal. And when you put that reaction to someone who, the depth of your love isn't even measurable, then it has a whole new way of opening you up to looking at it a little bit more objectively because you're so subjective about your son.
And what do you feel is something that young men really need, like at this point in time, that's missing from either society or, you know, from parenting? Like, is there? I'm sure there's probably more than one thing, and we're potentially opening a box of worms here. But, if you could boil it down to a few little things, like what would that be?
Um, there's a whole there is a big can of worms there, but the most important thing I think, and the most impact that can happen for a little boy growing up, is what happens in the home. So the key components are the parents, and the obvious problem is that parents all do the best they can with what they know. They all love their children. They all want the very best. And what they do and the decisions they make and how they parent are all for the right reasons. But because we're not aware of some of our deeper unconscious biases, like the one I had, if you never tap into that awareness, that perception that you have of what it means to be a boy or a girl, and how much those thoughts are impacting how you're parenting, until you tap into that and open that door, nothing will change. But the moment, it's like that thing when you're going to buy a car and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere you go. Once you open that door and have those thoughts, then you start seeing it everywhere. And then it changes everything. It changes how you see your son, how you understand the world that he's living in, and then how you can provide him with better support. So it's his
So
parents.
would you
That's
say that? So like the so I guess kind of what you're talking about is self awareness on the parents' part, right? Like
Mhm.
making sure that they're aware of their influences, their biases, and because is that something that you feel gets passed, like it gets passed on to your children? It's something that
Oh,
they
absolutely.
inherits, maybe not the word, but
Yes, you parent um, often from unconscious places. Even when, like, I read all the books about parenting. I knew this style and that style and these recommendations and this strategy, and I had all that information. But still, there are things from my own um, wherever it is inside that I don't consciously think of, but that are impacting the decisions I'm making. So there's one in particular. There was one experiment, and I do it sometimes when I'm doing a workshop just to prove a point. But um, there's a picture, a portrait of a toddler, and that toddler is dressed in stereotypical little boy clothes or little girl clothes. Let's say little girl clothes first. And uh, there were 5 or 6 adults, and they were interviewed one by one. They came into the room, they looked at the portrait, and the interviewer asked a series of 4 questions. He said, "What do you think that child's name might be? What do you think their behavior, their character might be like? What do you think their hobbies, what might their hobbies be? And what do you think their future might be career wise?" So they went through that with the 5 or 6 adults. And then they brought in a new portrait. And this portrait was of a child and dressed in stereotypical little girl clothes. The adults came in one by one, asked the same questions as before, and then left. And then the group came back into the room, and there were the 2 portraits there. And the interviewer said, "Okay, now look at your the answers to your questions. Like, think about what you said for those 4 questions for each one of these photos, and then think it's the same child." So it's kind of
yes.
like the responses were based on what you thought, and it was I mean, it's quite fascinating, and consistent. Every single time I have done that activity, it is consistent that there will be some part of unconscious gender bias that comes into it because you have associated a gender with that child. And that's where it all starts. So until you're aware of that you're doing that, so you have to be really quite curious about how you think, how your perspective is impacting how you're parenting.
And it's. I mean, one thing I talk to friends about, I've talked about on the podcast like a lot, is just how our kids are just mirrors of what we are. Like, you know, it's something that I've spoken about, where it's like I've worked out over the years that sometimes the things that I get most frustrated with my children about are the exact things that I'm doing, and
Mm-hmm.
it takes that step back where it's like, you know, you see them doing something and you kind of feel the frustration coming up, and it's like, hang on, why am I frustrated here? And it's like, oh shit, like that's me, like that's why I'm getting frustrated, and that's a part of
Yes.
me that I'm not happy with. And I guess that's kind of the same thing that you're saying there. Like, the parents have these inherent biases that they've got based off whatever context they're looking at, and that's going to be picked up by the kids eventually.
So you have that like inner baggage yourself that until you start to look into it, it stays there and it impacts. Like a really easy thing is if you're having some situation with your child, uh, and if you are reacting in a certain way, and if you can think in your head, would I react the same way? Would I say the same thing if it wasn't my son but it was my daughter? And sometimes that, because sometimes you really will say no. If my little girl did that, I would not react the same way that I am with my little boy doing it. So that's one thing. But the other thing is the awareness of how society also is doing that in so many ways. And even if it's not so deep in your family parenting, your child is getting bombarded with messages from society about what it means. I mostly talk about boys. So, what it means to be a boy. And so, they, like, when I started understanding about this, it was called the Boy Code. And that first was coined by Dr. William Pollock, who did gender studies out of Harvard. And when he talked, now I've heard it talked more recently as the man box. And there's a guy from Australia actually that talks quite well and with humor about that. But it's these myths. It's like, okay, boys are supposed to be boys. So the boy is supposed to be the strong, the leader, all the things that go with what you think a boy should be. And then boys will be boys. So that's when you start saying, well, yeah, it's okay for him to punch that kid because that's what boys do when they're mad. And so behavior gets explained away because that's boys. And will be boys, should be boys, and then boys are toxic. So the basic idea is that there is something um, ingrained, like it's in them. There's something inherently wrong with boys. There is
Hmm.
something to be fearful of, and that message comes across to our kids through things that they see in the movies, things they read, the songs they hear. It's every place. So what you get is a little boy who starts out just pure, naive, kind, sweet, just beautiful. And as time goes on, he experiences situations where how he is authentically feeling is not acceptable. So, for example, 4-year-old little boy is learning to ride his bicycle with his mom or his dad. And he falls down and he hurts himself and he cries. And the parent says, oh, come on, it's not that bad. You're fine. get on, get going, try it again, be a big boy. So what that little boy learns is that the person that he loves the most and wants to be connected with, that parent, they're telling him that that's not the behavior that is acceptable. So if he wants to stay in the good books with his parent, he can't show that behavior. So the next time that he falls and hurts himself and wants to cry, he's going to put on a mask. And that mask is going to cover what he really feels, and it's going to show what he thinks is more acceptable so that he can stay connected to the people that he really wants to be connected with. And the problem, excuse me, is that as time goes on and there are more experiences like that, and that little boy puts on one mask after another as he's growing up, then it becomes more and more difficult for that child to tap into their real core, their authentic self. And that's where I think you have a lot of the problems, as that little boy gets to be a young man or, an older boy. Those behaviors come because he has put on so many masks as he's going through because of these pressures from society.
It's a level of confusion there at that point, isn't it? It's like, this is what I'm
Absolutely.
feeling internally, but this is what I'm expected to do externally.
Yeah.
And so in that particular situation that you mentioned with the 4-year-old on the bike, like what would be a better way to let them, I guess, get through those feelings, but also emphasize that, like, it's important to get back on the bike or get back on the horse. Like, don't let, what would be a better way of handling that?
I think it's kind of like when you would do the same thing for the girl and the boy. So if it was because I've spent my whole life kind of on the playground and in the classroom, there are accidents all the time, and different cultures, the children react different ways. But I remember when I first was coming into Japan, and a kid would fall, and it would be like they were dead, like they'd be screaming bloody murder, and so I learned pretty quickly. It didn't matter if it was a girl or a boy. So when something like that happened, I would go immediately because you don't know if it's real or not. But I wouldn't over empathize. It was like I was quite firm, like, if you're all right, then please get up. And that was it. And I might have to say it a couple of times. And then when the child got up, then I could really put on the empathy. It's like, can you tell me what happened? Is your body hurt? Are you feeling sad? And then, what do you need to happen to make you feel better? And it didn't matter if it's a girl or a boy.
Yeah, it's the same approach, right? Like, I've got a girl and a boy. So our oldest is a girl and our youngest is a boy. And um, I guess that's one thing subconsciously I've tried to do is, we talk to our daughter at the moment thinks she's hard done by because there's an age gap, and we have higher expectations of her because she's older. And we've tried to explain to her that, look, it's not that you're being treated unfairly; it's that you're older. We have the same expectations of your brother at 5 as what we had of you at 5. It's just
Yeah.
now you're almost 9 and he's 5, so we can't have the same thing as they like. As you get older, you're going to have more expectations, but with that, you're going to get more. And so it's something that, as they grow up, it's pretty easy to get sucked into treating them differently just based off their gender because, you know, especially from a male point of view, like my daughter's dad's little girl, like, and my
Yeah.
son, he's my son. And it's kind of, we almost fail at the margin of our experiences, right? Like, I was parented a particular way, which was what my dad tried to do better than what his dad did, but it
Yeah.
was still, there were a lot of things that happened there. And I'm very cognizant of that. But I guess it comes back to your original point where it's all trying to have that level of self-awareness in the moment about what's going on, right? And not
Yeah.
falling back into those old patterns.
Well, usually that's it. Like we either choose to parent like we were parented, or we parent in a different way because we want to make changes. Like it's usually one thing or the other, but we're usually conscious of that choice that we're making. It's the unconscious decisions that we make that cause, more problems actually in how we're parenting. So the awareness is everything. And and there's ways to to kind of get into and examine, do you have some of these feelings that are unconscious, are they coming out in your parenting? And usually by the time people come to me, it's because there's too much chaos, there's too much happening, and the parent has tried everything, and they're working really hard, and still the level of frustration that they're experiencing in their parenting is not good for either them or their child.
Would that be very? There'd be a lot of grey area there, though, right? Like it's like the biases aren't. It's not always going to be, hey, I'm completely bias free in my parenting, and then hey, I'm completely like it's I'm letting these unconscious biases sneak in. There'd be a lot of grey area there, and it's kind of a learning process, right? Like it's not like a switch, you're on or you're off.
Hmm. I think you do turn the switch on or off. I don't think that everything is illuminated or fixed or
Hmm.
that it stops. But yeah, I do think that there is a switch that gets turned on once you become curious enough to start digging, and that's all it is. Just to keep digging to understand more, because there is so much there, and it can be, it doesn't need to be as hard as it is,
Mm.
either for us as a parent or for our children. It doesn't need to be so hard.
Yeah, and yeah, that's it's really powerful advice. I think that's being able to look inwards and be very self-aware is a skill that a lot of people lack, I think, in today's day and age. That it can be such a powerful driver for everything we do in life.
Well, and I think for males, like you're not forced into, but that's the expectation, that you're not going to dig deep into your emotions. You're not going to go searching for those problems. You're going to fix problems. You're going to, be the hero in the home. And so so that makes it twice as difficult, because um and it's changing. I will say that, like, it is changing. Young males growing up now that are young males, there are more of them, or I'm seeing more of them, who are curious, who are asking about things, but there's this disconnect. Not too long ago, I was on a podcast, two really lovely young guys in Montreal, and they're about the same age as my son. My son was a few years older. And it was just, the conversation was so beautiful because they're so open. But the interesting thing for me, which I get some more times than not from when I have conversations with young men, is I will say something and they'll say, "Oh, that you see that, you understand that, you get us, like you get what it means when you're the boy walking down the hill and that woman is afraid of you for no reason. You understand there is something there. You don't look at us like we're toxic males who are, on the verge of some kind of violent event." And that's what it's all about. It's like the boys, they need people to understand, so that they don't have to take all that stuff. It's not right.
They want to feel heard and they want to feel seen, right? Like it's a
For who
really
they
powerful
are.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like so. I was listening to another podcast the other day with have you heard of Dr. Becky Kennedy? I think it is.
Yep.
She does
Yep.
Yeah, and she was, and one thing that just stuck out to me, and it again doesn't matter whether it's male or females, but like a line she used is "I believe you." Like when you're taught, like when the kids are trying to tell you something, like it's like she kept coming back to that, and that was like
Yeah,
the one thing that stuck out to me, and I'm like, oh, like that's it's such a powerful little phrase just to show them that, like, you know, you're seen and you're heard, and you know,
yeah,
I get what's going on, because it's easy to, as a parent, to get into that mode of, especially for men, you know, trying to fix things. It's like, you know, there's sometimes a line in this house when we're talking or we're upset where it's like, for me, just because that's the default mode, it's like, am I listening or am I fixing now? Like, which
yeah,
one is it? Because there has to be, you know, I want to, like, you know, if there's a problem, I want to fix it as
absolutely.
a
Yeah.
as a default. But it's like, that's not, you know, not every solution needs a hammer to go with it, right? Like that's a
Well, especially if you're dealing with women,
yeah.
that's often not the case. In just in what you said about Dr. Becky's that phrase, "I believe," I don't tend to use that one as much unless it's like I would use that with my son because that's the relationship that we've built. But for all children, I would use the phrase, "I understand,"
Mhm.
and that's just to say you're in pain, even if what they did was wrong, they made some kind of poor choice or whatever. I can still understand where they are, what they're feeling, and that's the same thing. They're heard, they're understood.
That's great. In some of the information that you sent through to me, you use the line remarkable men helping boys become remarkable men. What do you define as a remarkable man?
Actually, someone asked me that question, and it kind of took me back. And I guess I think of remarkable humans, and then I attach those qualities to a remarkable man. But a remarkable human is someone who um, shows respect and empathy for others, compassion, who recognizes people's challenges and strengths and compliments and supports. It's someone who is confident enough in themselves that they can really be open and connected to others.
That's great. And to bring it back to, I guess, fatherhood, how important is the father's role in a son's development?
Huge, huge, absolutely huge, and not just their sons, like in everyone. Mothers and fathers both play pivotal roles in their children growing up. The mother is usually, Stephen Biddip.
I do.
So he talks he's incredible, and he talks about some different stages where, like in the earliest years, it's usually the mother, and often, that's also connected with the physical bond when the baby is first born. So in those first, maybe 3 years or whatever, the mother is really the prominent caregiver, although the father also has, contributions to it. And then after that, the next phase, it switches a little bit, especially for the little boy. And the father becomes he's in the highlight. So it's gone from mom to dad, and with the mom being a little bit more in the limelight. And then it moves up to dad being a little bit more, still with the mom contributing fully to it. And then when they get a little bit later on, like when they're moving into their, preteen teen years, that's when it goes to the next phase of mentors. And that's when the male mentors come into helping to support and guide the young boy who's growing up. So the parents still have, you know, like an extremely important role, but it shifts a little bit as your little guy is growing up. So the father is always like It's a very, very important role, just as mothers is. But sometimes I don't think we give enough attention and credit to the male role.
For sure. I 100% agree with that. I think some dads, especially dads that have reached out to me through the podcast, like they feel, well, like, in the early stages of being a dad, you do feel a little bit useless because, as you said,
Sure.
it's like there's the physiological reliance that the baby has with the mother that there's not a lot of input we can have with that. But I do get a lot of messages from dads who feel like their their contribution isn't as important as what it potentially is, which is one of the reasons for asking the question to I believe and know how important it is, and to have a positive male role model in both a daughter's and a son's life. For but there, I do believe it's for different reasons. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, I would. Um, I can speak to a relationship with my own father being, when I was growing up, the most important um, relationship I had, far surpassed my relationship with my mother. And then I can look at our son's relationship to his father. And although, the three of us have a really strong family unit, and we have different things, and part of it helps not just gender, but culture and language. But his relationship with his father is like it's a critical part in his identity. So part of the issue again still comes back to being unaware of these differences. So some of the struggles that young fathers have, and I will say the same thing because in those years I wasn't aware, but I think big onus goes on us as women. And because we've had that 9 months to grow and fall in love with that baby, and we've read all the books, and we're doing our best, and we usually have a support system, whether it's friends or family or something. We usually have something. But then I don't think most of us give our partners enough opportunities that really trust that, you know, the baby's going to be fine if I go out for an hour and leave, the baby with the. So I think there's also issues with how women connect and communicate with men. And that all comes back to understanding differences in gender. So I think men have it. I mean, you've got some things stacked up against you.
It's like the old thing, right? Like the amount of times that I'd take the kids out, and it's the line of, "Oh, you're babysitting." I'm not babysitting;
Yeah,
they're my kids too, right? Like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
uh that's kind of that stereotype, I guess, that you're saying. That's like societal stereotype, and
yeah.
I guess that changes from generation to generation too. That's not like my dad was the typical provider, would leave very early in the morning, come home very late at night. Like, I attribute a lot of my work ethic to what he displayed. But from the point of view of physical and emotional support, that wasn't there. But again, like failing at the margins of your experience, that was generationally, that's what it was. And there wasn't a lot of physical love or things like that. Whereas in our house, like my kids get hugged all the time. Doesn't matter whether it's my daughter or my son. Like hugs are given out as much as they want or need. It's so that changes each generation, and that will probably change again like next generation. And that's yeah.
I think the more awareness there is, like just in talking like that, I grew up also just a regular household. Father went out and worked, 6 kids at home. Mom does that stuff. And I remember as an adult coming home and some things had happened. But my father, when I was leaving, he gave me the biggest bear hug I had ever gotten from him. And he said, I see other dads doing this, and I never knew I could do it. Like, it was just heartbreaking, you know. It's not that he didn't want to, but he thought that's not how you be the best dad that you can be. So yes, I do think things are changing, but the conversation needs to keep going, and not it's not one side or the other. We both have to understand each other. So men have a responsibility, but so do women. And I think
Yeah,
we've done a
absolutely.
lot as women. There's been more growth and empowerment. And I don't think there's been that same level of empowerment to our males. So I think we've got to work at getting in balance together.
And you know, like, this is one thing, and again, this is just an opinion of mine. The growth and empowerment of women doesn't have to happen at the detriment to men. Like,
Absolutely.
it's and that's, I think that gets lost in
Yeah.
this, like the current state of society. Like, one of the things, and it doesn't matter what it is, obviously my background is training and strength and conditioning and nutrition and things like that. Like, it drives me up the wall that, like, things, in order for people to get exposure, have to be black and white. Like,
Yeah.
you have to be one end of the spectrum or the other.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of my, it's something I get very passionate about, because, like, context matters. Doesn't matter what you're talking about. Like, you
Yeah.
just have to be aware of the context surrounding the argument. And some contexts, those extreme approaches may be applicable, and in others it may be the other end of the spectrum. Like, you don't have to be one side of the fence or the other.
Well, the whole idea of a spectrum, I don't think that vocabulary word was in my generation. So that concept of everything really is on the spectrum, I think gives us more fluidity between the ends, and makes it easier when you're talking about things, because if I say one thing, people don't think that's the only thing. They think, okay, there's a line here, that there's a spectrum of how that might look in different places with different people. So that's positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, you know, I hope that eventually we can get away from, I don't know how soon it's going to be, but, you know, where this place where there's a lot of people that, you know, they can tell you their stance on something, and you'll be able to, like, you know, they're so stuck in their ways that you can go, all right, like, I kind of get a good read on the rest of your personality because of, like, that statement. And it shouldn't be that it shouldn't be able to be that simplified, because life's just not that simple, is it? You know, it's
Okay, can I, if if I can, I
absolutely.
and I did this once before, twice. I wrote, I put in my book an anonymous poem that just says exactly what you just said, and it's perfect. But if you don't mind, can I read it?
Please do.
So, for every strong woman tired of faking weakness, there is a weak man tired of faking strength. For every woman tired of faking foolishness, there is a man tired of having to act as a model of wisdom. For each woman tired of being labeled as an emotional female, there is a man who has been denied the right to cry and be sensitive. For every sportswoman whose femininity is questioned, there is a man forced to compete in order to give testimony to his virility. For every woman tired of being considered a sexual object, there is a man concerned about his sexual performance. For every woman who has not had access to a dignified salary, there is a man forced to bear the economic responsibility of another human being. For every woman who ignores the secrets of car mechanics, there is a man who doesn't know how to boil an egg. For every woman that steps toward freedom, there is a man who rediscovers the road to liberty. The human race is a two-winged bird. One is female, the other is male. Unless both wings are equally developed, the human race will not be able to fly.
That's very pertinent, and that's an amazing poem. Like, it's, and
Isn't that?
just, in today's society, it's something that I think needs to be reflected on like a lot more, because that a message like that just gets lost in the world at the moment.
Yeah, but that's the core of the message. And it's that it's, like you said, it's not if we make things better for females, then we stop making things better for males. And that's kind of the way it's gone um, in the last few generations. So
Yeah,
it's all about
understanding
making, yeah, sorry,
understanding there's enough to go around. Like, it's
absolutely.
your success doesn't have to be at the detriment of somebody else's. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter whether it's male and female, or it's, in business where it's like, I see that other person succeeding, they've got a similar business to mine. It's there's enough to go around, and it's
I don't
yeah.
know if it's Carol Dweck that I know she's got the mindset stuff, but having a mindset of either abundance or scarcity. And that's kind of the whole concept behind it. And when you have the mindset of abundance, that's the whole thing. There's enough for everyone. There's no need to hoard it or be worried about not getting enough. But if you have the mindset of scarcity, then everything is at risk of running out. So you're going to have to grab it really quickly before the other person does and you get left out. So, yeah, I think that's a crucial point in people um, being able to tap in how we can all have it good or better. We can all have it better.
That's fantastic. I do want to just ask you one last question before we wrap up. And this is relating back to one of the very first things you said when you were talking about moving to Japan. You said you read a book. What book
Yes.
was that you read before you moved?
I read Shogun by James Clavell, and it was just
I've
by chance. I got the book in a secondhand store. Up until that point, though, I had no interest or experience with Asia. Zero. My heart was set on someday going to Africa, and I had that interest all my life. So this was out of the blue, and again, one of those things, no rhyme or reason, but that pull was so strong. Like it was really quite incredible. But that pull is what brought me here and just changed the whole trajectory of my life.
Funnily enough, I've just ordered that book based off the back of the Disney series that has just come out.
Okay,
So I've read a few things that the series deviates from the book a little bit. So I'm interested in
it
actually
does.
reading the book, which is why I've ordered it. So I'm waiting for that to show up, which is
Well,
cool.
I
Very
read
cool.
that book in '84, I guess, and so that's 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And I did watch the series that recently came out, and there were things in it that, like, I remembered clearly from the book. Oh, that didn't quite happen that way, and it was just interesting that that book was so powerfully written that I could still tap into the image I had reading it while I was watching this newer version of it. It's a good book. He's a great writer.
Yeah, and I've noticed as I was searching for it, there's a series. So once I've finished this, I wouldn't mind diving into to the rest of his writings as well too. So that's
Yeah,
very good.
there's some good ones. Yeah.
Well, Kathy, I'm appreciative of your time and mindful of your time. So thank you for joining me. Do you want to let everybody know where they can find you, where they can get access to your coaching if it interests them, and plug anything that you'd like to?
So I would say to go to the website, and it's sunhoodcoaching.com. That has all the links to the book, to any courses, to my social media, especially on the Instagram social media link tree thing. There are several. I think there's 4 or 5 freebies that you can go on that will just give you some practical, information that will help open that door of curiosity to, what's the difference in raising a son. So that would be it. The website will give you everything, and then from the website, if you want to grab some of these freebies, you'll find all of those on Instagram.
I'll also pop all the links in our show notes, and they'll be in the show notes on the YouTube video as well when this is published. But Kathy, thank you so much for your time. I've really appreciated this conversation. It's been great.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed
Thank,
talking with you.
thank you.